There's an old adage about how to make a good decision when you're stuck between two different choices. It's been around for a while, and it actually works, and it sounds incredibly stupid the first time you hear it, but try it sometime, is that you grab a quarter. I don't know, Matthew, if you've ever heard this, right? Let's say you need to decide, I got two places I want to go out to eat, and I got two places I like. I don't know which one I want to go to. You assign one to heads, one to tails, you flip it, and the decision will come up heads or tails. That's not what's deciding it for you. It's how do I feel when I see the results? If I see heads and I'm like, oh, great, let's go, then that's your choice. If you see it and you're like, dang it, I was really hoping for the other one, then you go with the other one.
You know what you wanted.
But you didn't know until you flipped the coin.
You need the forcing function.
You do. And the first time I tried this, I was like, there's no way, because if I know what I want, I'm going to know it. But you flip that coin, you're like, dang it, I was really hoping. Okay, you got me.
Let me flip this guitar pick now, see if it comes up heads or tails. Should we tell people what we talked about on today's podcast? It's tails. That's no, but I wanted to tell them, Jack. So we should probably tell them.
So we should probably tell people. As I was thinking about this, I was going, you know what? I want to challenge people who are listening today, is that I want someone who has a customer who is facing some indecision, which is our topic of today. I want you to get on the call and just say, hey, customer, could you grab a coin right now? Heads you buy and tails you don't.
Yeah, who's ready to stake their commission on a coin flip?
Okay, I will say this. Please, nobody get mad at me if you lose a big deal. You have to have a good relationship with your buyer to do this. But I feel like I would love to know if someone is like, yeah, I feel like I could do that with a person I've been talking to. And if you do, please shoot me a note. I would love to hear about it, because I think that would be a hilarious way to kind of not break the ice, but just kind of have a good laugh about, making a decision on something.
You know what? If you tell me you've done that, I'll buy you a chocolate coin.
There we go. Chocolate coin on the line. How you're going to get the chocolate coin wherever, I don't know. That's for you to figure out, Matthew. You've signed up for this now.
You have to meet me in person in New York City.
Okay, there we go. So meet Matthew to get your chocolate coin. Welcome, everyone. This is the PreSales Podcast. I'm Jack Cochran, General Manager of PreSales Collective and co-host of the show. With me, as always, is Matthew James, my fellow co-host.
Hey, yes, it's New York Solutions Engineer. Come here. I think that, what is it? Probably like a $400 plane ticket, but I'll spend $5 to get you a chocolate coin.
Win-win, I think, right? They get to meet you in person and be in New York and have some good food and get a chocolate coin.
And Jack, today we were talking with Nikhil Sarma. Tell everyone a little bit about Nikhil, please.
Nikhil, I have known for years. He's been a part of the PreSales Collective community for quite a while. He has been in PreSales for more than 20 years. He is an expert on things like storytelling, discovery, demo strategy, negotiation, and he is founder of GTM Solutions Consulting, which he's been doing now for a couple of years. And he coaches teams on all of these topics, going deeper than your typical classes and courses. It's like full on a couple days of like really digging into these topics. He's developed his strategies from his times leading SE teams at places like Dolby, Optimizely, Lowfelt, and Contentful, and really a great person. I've enjoyed every conversation I've had with him, and I've enjoyed our conversation we had today as well.
We talked about indecision, what it looks like for pre-sales teams to engage deeper with buyers, and we told a couple of stories about what we've seen in the market. I had a really good time with this one. Probably good if you're coming into the end of your year, you've got a little bit of space to breathe. Just think through this one. Chew on some of the ideas that we talked about today. Jack, is there anything else we need to touch on?
No, nothing else getting in the way. Let's get right to the interview after the break. This episode is sponsored by StoryLane. Tired of endless demo requests eating up your calendar? Your prospects want to experience your product instantly, but traditional demos mean more scheduling, more prep time, and more repetitive presentations. Meet StoryLane, the leading demo automation platform for pre-sales teams. Create personalized, interactive demos in minutes, not hours. Capture your software in a few clicks, customize environments without code, and build a library of demos that just work. Share demos anywhere. Embed in your sales sequences, use as conference leave behinds, or let Lily, our sales AI agent, handle initial discovery and qualification calls while you focus on late-stage deals. Try StoryLane for free at storylane.io. That's StoryLane.io. StoryLane. Build killer demos in 2 minutes. Nikhil, welcome to the PreSales Podcast.
Thank you very much. Hi, Jack. Hi, Matthew. Thank you very much for having me, and hello to everyone who's catching this.
I'm so excited to have you on. We've known each other for quite a while. We've met in person, we've shared meals together, and I have always enjoyed talking to you. And today I'm sure it's going to be no different. And now we get to bring that conversation to the world. I think today's topic is going to be particularly interesting about customer indecision. How do you influence customers towards decision confidence? How do you influence them to be the point where they're confident in the decisions that they're making and overcoming that fear of making a choice that they can often have? I think it's going to be a great topic. And Nikhil, specifically on your kind of experience with this, you've been in pre-sales and sales for years, which is a good thing. What has changed over the course of your career about the customer buying behavior that makes indecision and confidence such a crucial problem right now?
So I think a few things have changed kind of at the same time. So number one, in tougher economic times, people are more careful about spending money, right? This is true of individuals, but it's true of companies as well. And buying decisions are under a lot of scrutiny. And yet, companies still need to grow. They still need to compete. And every company has key initiatives for the year that affect multiple different departments. And so that ties into the second point, which is, we've been seeing the number of stakeholders involved in B2B decisions. We've seen that number grow. So the senior stakeholders are all jockeying for a slice of the same pie. They're all lobbying for which initiatives should be funded, which should survive the next round of cuts. So this is what's happening on the buyer side of things. Now, the third point is on the supply side of the equation. It's never been cheaper to build software. We keep hearing this all the time, and it's true, right? Most of us, we operate in what is called a red ocean environment. So there are lots of players. It's very competitive. Everyone listening to this, it's probably not uncommon for you to have 7 to 8 vendors competing in every deal. Many of those have feature parity. So put yourself in the shoes of a senior stakeholder who's looking to make a buying decision. It's not easy. It's no longer a clear choice between an old paradigm and a new paradigm. There are many plausible options out there. And you have a lot of internal politics and budget concerns you need to navigate. You know that transformation projects are still failing at the rate of about 70%. It's crazy. And your job is potentially on the line, especially if you're on the wrong side of 40, 45. And it's a real concern. So the safest move for a lot of people can feel like, let's just stick with the status quo, or let's start small, right? And starting small is something we all dread as vendors because it's super frustrating after you spend 6 to 18 months working on an opportunity and say, you know what? That 200K op, let's start with a 40K investment and see how this goes.
It can feel like just a dagger to the heart with that. And I think you're right too, as you're mentioning it. I'm thinking back even to some software in my past that I've sold, which I would say if you're listening to this, raise your hand. You know what? Go ahead, I'll say it. If you're listening to this, wherever you're at, raise your hand if this is you. I don't care who's around. Just raise your hand. If you've ever thought, I don't think I can really distinctly describe the differences between me and someone that I'm competing against. We've got the slides, but am I really sure I know? I've been in that position.
We're commoditized. Oh no.
Exactly.
Just a bit.
And we all know simultaneously that the real selling is happening when we are not in the room. And so that indecision and that lack of clarity that Jack and Matthew that you just talked about, when that shows up as, when your quote unquote champion cannot confidently defend a request for an investment now to a CFO or a CEO or a board of investors and explain why your product will help their company compete better, operate better, control risk better. When that indecision shows up, it'll kill your deal.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I think you brought this out. What looks worse? You have, let's say, some target and you're performing against it today. Maybe you're exceeding by 5%. Maybe you're missing by 10%. If that just continues, is that worse? Or is it worse to try a strategic initiative, gamble yourself on that 70% chance of failure, and maybe you would have increased your results by 50 or 60%. So you'd be performing at 160% instead. But if that initiative fails completely, now you look maybe not so good, and you're in a very precarious situation, right? I think that's the kind of thing we're talking about here, and that leads to this indecision.
Absolutely. And it depends on a lot of different factors. It's not easy to say this is how it is in 100% of the companies, obviously. It depends a little bit on their appetite for risk. It depends on personality. It depends on their ability to handle these kinds of situations. But by and large, this is what we're seeing in buying committees. So there's a great book on this called The Jolt Effect. People have been talking about it since 23, but it's kind of like another great book, The Challenger Sale. Everyone says they've read it, or I think they're familiar with it, but not very many people have read it, and very few people have internalized and operationalized it. And I think that is really where the delta in performance lies between vendors who are truly exhibit a buyer enablement mindset and people who just pay lip service to it and just go and hawk their product.
So is this a ringing endorsement for the Challenger Sale? And what should we take away from it if we're going to drill one level deeper? What is it about that Challenger approach that makes such a big difference?
It's really first principles. Start with understanding your customer's business. I think with most enterprise and upper mid-market opportunities, this is really where I spend a lot of my time. When you start working that up, you're not really going to be very clear about much. You don't have a clear idea. It's like, do these people need this? What is value? I'm a strong believer in that statement that, the intrinsic value of your product is zero until you can show them how this is going to help their company, again, as I said, compete better, operate better, control risk better. So you're going to have a variety of issues out there. You're going to have some issues that are around value and value clarity. And then you're going to have a bunch of organizational issues and political issues.
I think you brought out something really interesting. The intrinsic value of your product is zero. To me, that means, let's say your buyer purchases your product. And I'm actually going to bring this into the real world. Jack and I are both musicians. We both got a guitar on the wall right now. And the intrinsic value of that is almost like saying, okay, we bought a product and we're hanging it up on the shelf. Cool, great. You get some benefit, some small benefit of being able to say it looks nicer, right? I think your wall looked great, Jack. I hope you think mine looks great too.
I like your wall as well.
Thank you. But let's say you buy, let's just pick a random SaaS, right? Let's say you buy Slack and you say, okay, we have Slack now. The intrinsic value of having Slack, okay, it's on our toolbar, but what is that actually doing for us, right? If I don't pick up the guitar off my wall, the intrinsic value is much lower. I have to figure out what I want to use it for so that it can have an impact on, quote unquote, me, my business, right? I think that's what you're getting at, right, Nikhil?
So with art and music, it's always a different thing for me personally. I'm a musician as well. I have a guitar in the background and I do play that for, the sense of satisfaction it gives me.
Well, there it is. There's your business case.
It makes me feel better. But unfortunately, businesses don't make decisions that way, right? Businesses are making very hard-nosed decisions on, hey, there's some cash flowing into this building and there's some cash flowing out of this building. So how is your software going to help me end up in a better position? What exactly is this going to help me with? So yeah, I would take a step back. And this is something I really encourage a lot of people to think about. All companies of a certain size have three key stakeholder levels. There's the operational level. These are the people who live with processes every day. There's the managers, so these are managers all the way to SVPs. And there's the executives, so your EVPs to CXOs. And so value for them is expressed in different ways for each of them. So for the operational folks, it's primarily in terms of time. For managers, it's KPIs, the resources they have to deliver those KPIs to the business. And for executives, it's fundamentally financial. So if you're able to convince someone that you can help improve a process or a dashboard or something simple like that, but if they cannot see why this connects to the company's strategic direction, or what specific KPI or metric will change, will this positively impact, then you have a value clarity problem. So that's one set of problems that you typically have. And then you have organizational issues, and these are a little bit different. This is when you start talking about priorities and timing and ownership and, what have you tried before, etc. And this is not unusual. Gartner released some really interesting research in May this year, in 2025, showing that 74% of buying teams experience unhealthy levels of conflict during a purchasing decision. That's 74%. And this friction has nothing to do with your product. It's all internal dynamics, it's competing priorities, and it's just a reality that multiple teams are fighting for limited budget, limited attention.
I don't think I've ever seen a marketing slide that gets into, hey, by the way, now when you're selling to your customer, keep in mind of all these factors that's competing that have nothing to do with your product. Like there's no way to prepare for the fact you can't sell into that conversation is what I'm saying. It just exists and you have to know that it exists. How do you know though, like when you're talking to someone and it seems like they're having a little bit of indecision or they don't have the confidence to make a decision? How do you know whether it's a lack of clarity of the value if they don't understand the value they're getting out of it versus something that you have no control over, the other priorities and the political? How do you know how to tell when it's either of those?
This is all discovery, right? And something that I strongly believe, again, is that discovery is not just what you learn about your prospect so that you could show them something or try and convince them of your product. Discovery is what they are learning about their own organization. And because a lot of times the people we're selling to, we tend to be very single-threaded and they live in their own silo within the organization. Especially when you're talking about a larger organization, it's very easy to kind of get sucked into the day-to-day. So how do you diagnose this, right? Which is your question. You probe into dependencies, you get other perspectives, play the devil's advocate. I think that's a very confident move. It's a move that shows that, you have this experience before, you understand how companies work, you understand that there are competing priorities, that you're not just coming at this as, hey, I've got an amazing product, I think you should buy it, which is fundamentally what most pitches come down to. So get these other perspectives. What other teams does this affect? Who has a different view on this? Why aren't you building this in-house? And then you get into more specific and sophisticated questions once you have a little more context. But the key thing is what you want to see is a kind of convergence. And you want to see a convergence of interests and convergence of influence as you get higher in the organization. Because as we were saying, the C-level, the execs, they know let's say for 2026, this is what our company is going to be focused on. That's why we do annual planning. I said, these are the things that we're going to be focusing on. So, hey, guess what's going to get funded in 2026 or has a higher likely probability? It's stuff that aligns to what they've already decided on. If you're coming in with something which is completely at a tangent, then I'm not saying it'll never get funded, but the likelihood of that is smaller. There's this quote, it says, money flows where the attention goes. That is something for us to keep in mind.
That is so clear when you look back, I feel like, on your deals, especially when you look back, if you do postmortems on deals that you've lost, I feel like we tend to have a much better clarity, especially if we've been given the feedback from the customer on why they didn't go with us, where you can often see a misalignment, especially when it was a quote unquote no decision, right? When it was like, we decided to not pursue this project. It often is much clearer, and you can often realize there were cues that we were missing. There were things we weren't asking. There was things we were taking for granted because the customer was talking to us. We assumed if they want to, they could buy it today, which is not the case. It used to be the case, right? That if a customer wanted to buy something, they could go get the funding for it and buy it. Now it's if the customer wants it, they have to probably sell harder than you did to make this thing happen. And I know I've looked back on projects and been like, I should have picked up on these clues of the things I could have helped my customer with in the conversations that they were having, or known when it was probably not worth my time to pursue something because they didn't have what they needed in order to make this project a reality in the first place. Absolutely.
Most of the teams that I coach, it's very similar to what you just said, Jack. They have a solid grasp of the operational level. And as SEs, we typically tend to really kind of dig into that. We love that detail. We love to show them things. We say, okay, here are all the various technical capabilities. Here are the technical possibilities. So teams typically have a solid grasp of that operational level, and they have some understanding of what the managers care about. There might be one KPI, and that's kind of when things start to go off the rails because they say, okay, well, there's that KPI. I can save you X amount of time or X amount of FTEs. And isn't this a business case? Let's start building this amazing business case. But they have almost no visibility into that exec level. And why is that a problem? Because that is where the money is unlocked. And if you do not understand that manager-exec dynamic, you cannot have a real conversation about why they should change.
So how do we get to it? Because I've definitely seen this in many deals across my time in pre-sales. It's you have great alignment with your champion, and then at some point you find out that, like you said, the money and the attention was somewhere else. So how do you find that out? What's our move there?
So this is kind of where in your discovery, what you need to be pushing for is each department that you're speaking with. Let's say you're speaking to someone from marketing. So marketing needs to deliver certain things. The VP of marketing or the SVP of marketing, what is he or she going to be measured on? How does this connect to a specific business initiative, the key business result that the company has decided that they are going to be focused on? Now, marketing doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's going to be a tech team. There's going to be a product team. There are going to be other teams involved. Those departments have their own priorities. In some cases, there is a convergence. As a company, they need to hit a certain goal, and that requires marketing and IT to work together. So it's upon us to really go and discover who else is going to be involved, whose input is required. And that is how we kind of figure this out. And then tied to that key business result that the company needs to actually deliver, to their investors, to their shareholders, because that is what is driving these investment decisions. So one practical thing to your question, James, something that I found works really well is collaborative whiteboarding. So when we start out with a lot of prospects, everyone's just, when we're just having a conversation and it's just Zoom boxes or whatever, the people are just talking about themselves. But I teach a technique and a framework where you kind of go in with this collaborative whiteboard and then you say, okay, let's kind of map this out. So you're here. These are your processes. Here's the why, what, how. Let's try and understand what is the environment that you're working in? What's happening to the left and to the right of you? And then how does this all kind of help your company achieve certain results? So once you have that convergence, the messaging that you need to start feeding each person, how to build these champions. Conversely, if you find that people are actually pulling in very different directions, it doesn't mean that you stop selling into that org, but you've got to dig a little deeper. You've got to help build consensus. And that is the most important thing.
I would have loved to be able to have done that with, I think, every customer that I came across. One thing that I've seen, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, though, is I feel like almost a reluctance to want to spend that amount of time and effort with someone that you're trying to buy something from the customer side, where there's that stat that goes around saying that by the time a customer is talking to you, they've already done 90% of the decision buying steps on their own. They've done so much self-research. They've talked to other people. And by the time they're talking to you, you can't get as deep with them as you used to. I know the approach is still valid. How do you get someone who might be coming to you thinking, I just want to hear the specifics about your thing that you've got, because I don't need you involved in either part of the process. That's my thing to deal with. How do you get them to realize that you can help them, that you're there invested with them, and part of what you are able to do and part of what you're offering is to do this, collab, whether it's the whiteboarding, it's helping them to sell internally. How do you get a customer there? Because I feel like people aren't as open to this as they used to be.
Yeah. And it's not going to work in every single case. But here's something I'm convinced about. If you are operating in an environment where you have a whole bunch of competitors as almost feature parity. This happened to me, by the way. The last company that I worked at, when I joined, we had two, as they would call, legacy competitors. And then we were doing the cool new thing. And there were two other companies that did something similar to what we did. So these were the people who showed up in every single deal. 2 years after I joined, there were those two legacy competitors, and there were about 25 other competitors who did something similar to what we did. Several of them had feature parity. Several of them had 80% of our feature set or 40% of the price. And like what you were saying, Jack, there's a whole bunch of people who said, well, we're sending you an RFI, we don't need to talk to you, or we're sending you an RFP, or we just want to see your demo. And the thing that I learned would really help was to say, look, at the end of the day, all these different pieces of software can do most of what you want. So how do you differentiate in that? One is, who can actually help you in a consultative manner by showing you like, hey, look, at the end of the day, when you go down this path, here are specific issues that you need to be thinking about. And here is the risk. A good part of the sale, I would say about 50 to 60% of the sale is really de-risking the implementation. I think proactively bringing that up and having a plan to address that, not just bringing it up, but actually having a plan to address that, that is what really sets you apart. Because the tech is the easiest part of this equation. It's the processes and the change management and the risk management. That is really where you win deals.
And that's a critical point as well, because most customers are going to have failed implementing, if not software you provide or service you provide or hardware you provide, something similar, or they'll have experience with having an implementation fail. So that definitely should strike a chord, especially if you get someone to listen to you. Hey, by the way, our implementation, this is something we want to talk to you about because we want to make sure this project doesn't fail after you make your choice. That's a great approach.
Yeah. And also, we talk day in and day out about storytelling and all of that, but stories are really powerful. References are really powerful. I want people to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly of what happened when they tried to implement my software, because it is not all roses. It is 100% not all roses.
Yeah, I think positioning your own learnings, right, is so powerful when you can do it the right way and say, all right, we've worked with organizations like yours before, and what we've seen that has been really helpful is... And that's how you tee up your ask, right? And then you go, where we've seen not that kind of engagement, it has resulted in just not hitting the right kinds of goals as you wanted to. Going all the way back to what you mentioned of these deals that shrink sometimes at the last minute. I've seen that instead of going for the full 100% commit, if you go, let's say that 20%, that doesn't mean just 20% of a monetary investment. Sometimes that can also mean 20% of a project investment. And a lot of the time, that is just not enough to drive the change, to start the momentum, to show success, right? So it's almost like we are doubly not setting ourselves up in the right way. There's almost like a floor of level of personal investment, not just cost, but time, resources, and commitment to a project that you need to get your buyer bought into.
It's sort of like saying, hey, we're going to buy one plane ticket for our family vacation instead of 5 to save money. We'll still have a really successful family vacation. I'll go. You guys stay here. It'll still work. Okay.
We'll get 20% of the rest.
Yeah, it's great.
That's a brilliant point. I think companies need to, especially when we're talking about upper mid-market, enterprise level companies, they need to go in with a certain level of financial investment, but to your point, Matthew, resource investment. And that is how they're going to see that real change, because there is so much more after the sale of this. There's so much more that they need to do in terms of training people, in terms of getting people to work a different way. There's so many times I spoke to customers and they said, why are we changing anything? These are people at the operational level. It's taken us 5 years to get to this point where we are comfortable with this process.
5 years is a long time in modern business to be comfortable with a new process. I believe it. I've seen it, but that is something to keep in mind. Is we lose sight of that in sales sometimes, where we feel like we make our sale, we're done. But the customer is just beginning often a process that'll take longer than the sales cycle took to begin with. And remembering that during our sales, you're absolutely right. It's the implementation, it's the adoption that's critical. So looking at the time here, we are getting close to the end of this episode. Before we do, Nikhil, I always try to ask 2 questions at the end. The first of which is, how can people get a hold of you? Let's say they've either enjoyed what you want to say, they want to tell you why they think you're wrong, or maybe want to hopefully tell you why they think you're right, or maybe they're interested in having you come and run a workshop with their team. How can someone get a hold of you, and what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, please connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is Nikhil Sarma, Nikhilsarma. So just put that after the / in, and you should find me. And I'm sure you'll find it in the show notes as well. And if you want to discuss any of these topics, I would love to with you. I'd also, if you want some help coaching your team and you want to discuss some approaches, I'm absolutely open to that. My website is gtmsolutions.co. So that's gtmsolutions.co. So one thing I want to leave you with is especially pre-sales and pre-sales leaders, but really anyone involved in sales. My ask is, get your teams more financially fluent. I think this is extremely important. There's a lot of tech, and I know things are not always moving as quickly as we want them to move, but we'll get to a point where, or we are already getting to a point where pre-sales is evolving. And I think financial fluency is really where I think it's the promise of what being a solution engineer really is. If you say solutions engineering is mapping technical capabilities to business value, I think we don't do a good enough job yet of speaking about business value. You're not really able to speak to CFOs, really. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that I'd love to talk about further about how to build a business case. What are metrics that you should be looking at? What are terms that you should really get comfortable with? Don't stop at ROI and TCO. There's several other things that CFOs and procurement should be, they look at. There's net present value, internal rate of return, payback period, what's a hurdle rate. These are things that we should get really comfortable with. And I believe that this is what helps build a solid business case. Everything that you do in your discovery, everything you do from day one, that helps build this business case. So that's something that I'm deeply focused on. And I'm seeing the teams that I coach benefit a lot from that way of thinking.
I think you're right. That would help up-level, I think, every conversation. So I love those final thoughts, Nikhil. Really appreciate you being here on the PreSales podcast. And I look forward to whenever I get to see you next. I always look forward to our conversation. Thanks so much, Nikhil.
Thanks so much, Jack. And thank you, Matthew. It was a pleasure being here, and have a great rest of the year and great start to 2026.
Thank you for listening to the PreSales podcast by PreSales Collective. Did you know that we also post on the PreSales Collective blog following each episode? Head there to read through information on shows you might have missed or find another past episode to listen to. For more information on the PreSales podcast itself and to listen to those past episodes, visit presalescollective.com/podcast.